live now, and thanks everybody who has joined us both here and on the other side of the screen, both now and perhaps also in the future if this is getting recorded and rebroadcast later on. We have what I think is a brilliant panel here to end up today's conference, the last panel on the agenda. It's about communicating for change. I mean, most of what's been talked about today all over the panels is about the changes that are broadly desired from our points of view in a variety of issues and topics. Our job, as I see it, as a moderator of the panel, is to discuss what are the communicative measures, technologies, abilities, capacities, capabilities that we have or should build in order to get there once we've established what the changes are. And, so as to not have this in a very abstract way, this discussion, it's obvious that the changes that we desire, and we do mostly all share those issues, are on the issues that are today on the public agenda, starting from the refugee crisis, which probably is not just a crisis of the year or the decade, but perhaps of the century. From the European point of view, it could be the crisis, the existential crisis of the civilization, even. But there are many other issues also that we, both in Estonia, are grappling with, and many other nations are as well, where contemporary media, the traditional civil discourses that we've gotten used to have between elites aren't cutting it anymore, because the people are not responding to those civil discourses anymore, are not accepting the narratives or the arguments that are being put forward, because they don't resonate very well with the pre-existing frames that they have in their mind, and because they're anxious, because they are fearing something. So let me introduce the panel that we have today in front of you, some of whom you know, and some of whom you probably don't yet. So our super cool panel. First, Riina Raudne, well known probably to everybody. She's a PhD in public health from Johns Hopkins, but for more than that, she's actually known as a social activist for most of us, having probably orchestrated and still ongoing, run the most successful social campaigns in Estonia, firstly in combating HIV prevalence and HIV-related stigmatization and humanizing the whole face of HIV through a very brilliant campaign through activating employers, for example, as part of what she did. And the second, of course, which everybody know very well, is her campaign in combating social acceptance and cultural norms relating to alcohol consumption. Sven Mikser is an MP, no introduction needed. He's a chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Parliament. He's a ideological social democrat, as he identifies himself clearly, and he has also been twice in the government cabinet as Minister of Defense throughout in the course of the last 15 years. Ben Judah, I've been covering him personally on Twitter and reading his stories for a couple of years now, and was glad to see him on Lennart Meri conference last year. So some of you know him from that as well. When I asked him a couple of days ago over email, what is he going to talk about, and then he attacked me. What do you mean? What I don't even understand what the premise of this conference is. I'm not an actor or an agent of social change. I'm a writer. I'm an artist. So, and I'm not in those very same words, but and I really want to have that same fire here, because he was way too modest. I think he's changed a lot through his writing, through. I think many of us have identified with what he's been writing about Russia and life there, and how the apparatus and the power vertical is affecting the lives of everyday Russians. And the last, not least, of course, as is tradition to say, Brian Reich. I don't know how to keep it short. You guys all have very impressive resumes. He has written a couple of books. I don't know what's the first job title that you would use yourself to describe yourself, but you too, sir, are a social activist, I'm sure, very much versed and interested in politics with his background there. now working for an innovation lab relating to the refugee crisis and how Americans should be more and could be gotten more on board to engage in the refugee crisis, working for the innovation lab for UN in the US. So that's our panel today. My first question for you is to sort of establish the problem. You know, what is the problem here that we should be focusing on when we're talking about these issues that we have on the public agenda, and how to, and why are we not able to attack them through communication in the ways that we're accustomed to?
Well, I mean, so I would start by saying I think there are many problems that are all interconnected and reliant on each other, both in terms of understanding what needs to be solved and then ultimately for solutions to be developed. And I think a big part of the challenge that exists right now is we try to introduce these challenges and frame these problems in ways that are far too simple. So take the refugee crisis as an example. For the most part, it is presented as a humanitarian challenge. And it is, in fact, a great humanitarian challenge, probably the greatest of our time, if not, any time going forward, as you said. But it is not just a humanitarian challenge. It is also a political challenge. It is a systems challenge. It is an economic challenge. It is an innovation challenge. It is a migration challenge. Like any word you want to use, the refugee crisis has, any problem you want to solve, the refugee crisis represents it. So when the humanitarian community, when the media, when political leaders hold up the refugee crisis and command or urge people to take action, if they're only presenting it or largely presenting it as a humanitarian crisis, the response that you're going to get is only going to be through that one narrow perspective, and it is likely to only attract those who are deeply self-motivated for humanitarian reasons. And it does not take into account all of the different complexities and all the ways that they play into it. So in the United States, our big challenge is we have about 320 million people in the United States. Maybe 10 million of those people are deeply self-motivated to take action on philanthropic causes to support nonprofit organizations. A tiny fraction of that 10 million is deeply motivated and self-interested to do that around global challenges, right? So they'd much rather take care of homelessness or illiteracy or hunger in the United States than basically anything outside their direct worldview and their understanding. So that's maybe 1 million people in the country who are capable of self-motivating to address something like the global refugee crisis. And we know how big and how complex it is. And 1 million people spending some of their time or a little bit of their money on that is not going to make much of a dent at all. The second problem then comes up is, okay, let's say that we can expand the number of people in the country who recognize that the refugee crisis is something of importance to them and that they need to address. If what we ask the rest of those people to do is based on this simplistic understanding of these complex issues, we're not going to make any progress either. So the tech community in the United States has raised its hand, has come out and said, we want to help solve this problem. We will offer our coders, we will build new tools to solve these problems and figure these things out. And they say, government, humanitarian community, tell us what to do. And the humanitarian community and the government says, donate money. Maybe advocate, care, use your voice, right? Those are all important things, but they're not going to reach the level of identifying and pursuing actual solutions. So the challenge, I think, first and foremost, is we have to completely reimagine and reframe the way in which we go about trying to tackle these complex problems.
I think that's like a Swiss problem to have. From our Estonian point of view, it's what we call Swiss problems. It's nice problems to have. I mean, our case is that we're not even there yet. People are like, there's nobody here yet, but everybody is crazy from fear.
Nope, that's
like this is the end of the civilization now. So from my point of view, is like how to first overcome that, how to overcome that fear and anxiety. Riina, what do you think?
I agree. I think that's one aspect of it. I'm going to respond to what you just said, and you know, if you take a global look at the refugee crisis, I think every aspect that you just named is on the table. I'm less of a believer, and I have too little patience to wait for one smart global solution to end all of it at once. And I think I'm much more of a believer that we are in a state of chaos right now. Maybe it could be a creative state of chaos, but really there's a lot of emergence going on in various places, and it's a scary place to be, but also maybe we can acknowledge that probably the way forward is to let self-organization happen in many places. You know, there are, even today we've heard of brilliant little solutions that can be initially tried out, you know, on small scale as innovation, just, you know, people literally building Airbnb for refugees, or figuring out ways to offer education. And then these solutions can be scaled up. They will depend on people, and you know, I think the most scary thing about this is right now that nobody knows the answer, and to even put that out there could in a way be liberating. It's like, it's okay to say we currently don't know. We're all looking for solution, and maybe this is a way to really start engaging much more widely.
I agree with you completely on both the fact that we're in chaos and that we should, you know, distribute and decentralize the idea of coming up with solutions. The problem that ends up presenting itself in what you said, from my perspective, is people go out, they come up with solutions that they believe are appropriate for the problem that has been presented to them, not recognizing it's a larger problem. They don't scale. But then the worst thing that happens, and we've seen this historically in a variety of different things, is those people become exhausted, frustrated, and then they disengage. So I'm not saying we're going to solve the problem from the top down, absolutely not. We're also not going to solve the problem from the bottom up.
Exactly.
The whole, you know, mechanism needs to change. But we keep in this weird, bad way, in a world in which we are totally connected and totally networked, we continue to try and pursue these conversations and these solutions in a linear way. So I love the idea of, you know, Airbnb or whatever you want to, you know, call it unbranded, in every place where somebody needs shelter. In the United States, it's just not practical. And so someone comes up with the idea and says, you know, we should open our homes in the United States and bring refugees into the United States. We actually have an incredibly effective policy for bringing refugees into the United States that has become politicized and all of that. We have a way that works right now in the United States. It's not working for the challenge that we have, but it's working. Everyone at present agrees that it's decent. So the person who comes and says, we should just do what Canada did. Someone says, you know, we actually have a really high functioning system and law for how to deal with this, so your idea sucks, basically. And they go, screw you, I'm gonna go deal with a different issue. And that's the tension that exists here, is that everybody is defending their turf and saying my idea is better than your idea and my process is better than your process, instead of saying none of this shit is working. Throw it all out and let's figure out the pieces that might work, put them back together and redesign the whole thing. And I believe if you look at any successful social change effort over the last entirety of human existence, however long that is, it probably didn't build dramatically on something that wasn't working. So if we all acknowledge that what's currently being done to solve any of these complex problems are not working, why are we trying to build on top of the system that no longer functions well?
Sven, I really want you to cut in here. I mean, should we like abandon all hopes on expecting the government to like in Estonia's case, for example, to somehow communicate its way out of this refugee crisis with the fear and anxiety that is prevalent in the society, and as we look at the polls, is increasing by percentage point every month? And should we decentralize, for example, say that there's nothing we can do, and please, people of Estonia, accept this challenge and
there's definitely, there are things government can do, but governments cannot do everything. I think that when you look at the crisis, the migration crisis, then in Estonia the crisis is actually happening in people's heads. It's not, you do not see masses of migrants walking in the streets. I mean,
That's the worst place. It's the head.
But basically, if you read what people write in the media, if you hear what people are talking around the dinner tables, you get the feeling that that's the case. In some countries not too far away, the crisis is very much real. I think that whenever you've had social upheavals, very rapid social change, there are also sort of forces that sort of try to mobilize against the change. There's this sort of innate conservatism in people, and when people sort of experience uprootedness, they tend to react in a certain way. Now the question is whether with this sort of scientific, technological progress, we've come to a stage where you will not have a sort of stabilization period after this very rapid change. It may be that we are now seeing ever accelerating change. And I think that with the spread of information, well, first on migration crisis, I think that basically it's to a degree it's something that you have to accept as inevitable, because now today you have technology available. Basically, there are vehicles whereby people can move very fast in great numbers from one side of the globe to the other. There are communication channels whereby people actually get information, I mean, true or slightly exaggerated, but they get information as to what it is like to look in places where the standard of living is much higher than where they find themselves to be. So I think it's inevitable. If you do not start a sort of Luddite movement, and then I think it's quite natural that people aspire for a better life, and they will keep migrating. I mean, it's been happening in the past thousands of years, but and it will happen in the future as well. So it's to a degree it's something that we have to accept. Now on the level of information or communicating for the change, I think the problem is that now you have this proliferation of information. I mean, the amount of information is I mean, multiplying exponentially every day. And the human capacity of actually processing that information has not changed from, say, 200 or 300 years ago. So you have all this infotainment. I mean, you basically, I had this weird experience during the economic crisis. I went to my kitchen to make a sandwich during a nightly news program. I came back and there was a sort of bald man basically making predictions as to when the economic crisis was about to end. And then it appeared it was not a PhD, it was a participant from this clairvoyance contest. So I mean, people do not have sufficient, average people, they do not have sufficient long attention span, they do not have any capacity of critically assessing what the information is, or what's the quality of information they are being fed. And that makes the task of the government or any other communicator so much more difficult. So basically, and to make things worse, actually we have agents who are actively interested in spreading rumors, false messages, who try to benefit from actually.
But you're describing
spreading
problems.
the chaos.
You're describing problems.
Yes. And I think that the best that the government can try to do is to actually try to sort of allay the fears and basically try to sort of the message should be like I cannot find a word. I mean, basically trying to calm the fear, the irrational fears of people. I do not think that it can be much more than that, because I mean the level, or the sort of intelligent discourse that you find at the level of the elites. I mean, that's not the way to actually allay the fears of people who are not actively interested, who basically get the stints of information between the, I mean, having coffee and doing dishes and playing with the children. I mean, you cannot basically explain everything on the minute detail level to those people.
I wouldn't even differentiate between the people. I mean, like heads of committee chairs or MPs that I'm talking to, people seem to be stimulated by the very same fears. I mean, that's how fear works. It's like an amygdala and your hormonal responses, and if you see a foreign face flicker on the TV, then your, head starts this process. It creates fear, and it happens in all of us. Some of us just have mechanisms to cope with that. But, Ben, how do you see what the media's role in this is?
Is this on?
Yeah, sure.
Well, before we sort of talk about the media's role, I just want to talk a little bit about the kind of demographics of Europe, and the demographics in particular of Central and Eastern Europe and the demographics of Western Europe. And I think the migration crisis, I don't think that the general population in Europe is somehow kind of deluded or doesn't understand what's happening, because the general population has correctly intuited that the demography of Europe is being utterly transformed. Let's just look at my country and at Great Britain. And according to research by the University of Oxford, by mid-century, the population of Britain will be 30% non-white, and there will be a white other, predominantly Eastern European population, of around 10 to 15% of the population. So you're looking at what classically viewed itself, this population of sort of a white British, as it's called, significantly reducing as a percentage of that society. And that's this sort of knowledge that you find the population is intuited, they don't know the correct statistics, is one of the very big drivers around the fact that the United Kingdom's very resistant to taking refugees, and one of the big drivers behind Brexit. Looking at France and looking at Germany, the demographic transformation is also going to be particularly marked. Like the French population, we don't have exact figures for it, which is Islamic or of Muslim or of heritage of that confession, is around 10%, and that will grow dramatically in the decades ahead. One of the interesting differences between the demography of Western Europe and Central and Eastern Europe is the demography of the West is very positive. The British population, the French population, the German population are projected to increase. Germany's population tilt having, of course, been changed by the current crisis, whereas the Central and Eastern European populations are projected to decrease dramatically. Obviously, it's very hard to put a correct estimate on this, but the percentages are projected to go down between 10 and 30% in some countries in this region. So there's already a degree of inevitability about this demographic transformation, and the fact that what's currently happening is accelerating that. I don't think it's delusional for the population to be deeply concerned, and one of the reasons is, we have a conversation which is based around the assumption that Britain, France, Germany, that these are sort of classical, these are still classical nation states. And I think the period, actually looking back in history, of us living in classical nation states is actually quite a small window. They emerge in the 18th century. They sort of, after periods of great violence, solidify in the 20th. And I think it's perhaps a mistake, it's definitely a mistake to expect them to sort of endure long into the future in their current form. And the assumption of integration is that you have migration that's going to be assimilated into the dominant population or behave like them and think like them. I'm not sure that's going to happen. I think it's very important to look back in history, which is often forgotten about, and to remember that classically, cities or countries that existed on the prosperous trade routes of the world were very multi-ethnic. The sort of classic cities of the imagination of the past, like Alexandria or Baghdad or Calcutta. These were very, very multi-ethnic cities. And typically because of the weak power of the state in that era, and I think we live in a period in which the power of the state is weakening, communities established immense powers and ran their own education systems and often had their own sort of political strength. Looking at the UK currently, looking at the EU currently, I don't believe in decentralization of response. I think that's I don't think that's an answer. I'm very much a centralist. And I think one of the astonishing problems is that there is a vast amount of money, and the economies are vastly larger than we believe they are because of offshore. And in the United Kingdom, where I know the statistics, we have more money in British sovereign territory, which operates as tax havens, than in the entire GDP of the United Kingdom this year. It's an extraordinary sum. And that money, because of the general weakness in our political system of political actors over capital, we cannot access that funds. And in terms of technology companies, in the United Kingdom, Facebook's been paying tax of below actually my tax bill of last year, and I'm a journalist and a writer, I don't earn very much. And if Facebook's were willing to contribute to the refugee crisis, Facebook should pay tax in the United Kingdom and shouldn't pay tax rooted through tax havens.
Right, but I think, let me pick up on two things that you're saying. One is that what I pick up from what you're saying is an assumption that if the systems that are in place functioned as they should, that these problems would be more easy to address, which is to say if we had a high-functioning government with all of the funds that it needed to do, that they would just, in their own, gracious self-interest say, aha, refugees, it's going to happen, et cetera, et cetera. First of all, there is the need to accept that the world has fundamentally changed and that migration is a constant reality. And to your point, and I agree with your point, we have not come to that realization. And so we cannot get to the good stuff if all we're doing is having this irrational conversation about other people and how it's going to change. I would love to be, 25 years old with what I know at my current age of 38, and be able to make a whole set of different choices and not have my back hurt when I go play a game of basketball or whatever. The unfortunate reality is I'm gonna get older. So I've come to accept the fact that I'm going to get older, and I adapt my behavior and I come up with, new ways to run my life. The world has changed. Migration and climate change and all sorts of things are the reality. Instead of having a conversation about and trying to solve for the problem that happened yesterday or based on the history and models that no longer apply, what can we do to figure out things going forward? And so to me, and this goes, and I'm very interested in your experience, and we talked a little bit about this previously, with respect to things like behavior change, we are now in an age where we have enough intelligence, data intelligence and otherwise, to reasonably predict behavior and influence future behaviors. That freaks people out a little bit because what do you mean you know more about what I'm going to be or how I should act than I currently do based on my existing experience? But knowing that, instead of saying, damn it, people are not going to mix well. People don't like each other. The people have never lived well together, so obviously they'll never be able to live well together, right? We should be saying, well, what would the world look like if we did things differently? In the United States, 10 years ago, 10 years ago, right? We're 250 years old in the United States, right? 10 years ago, gays and lesbians were pariahs in American society. As of 8 months ago, they are, the same as everyone else. Frankly, they were the same as everyone else before, but now our legal protection's caught up. Because people imagined 10 years out that we should have a society in which, a person who has a, partner of the same sex would be in the hospital and need their legal rights represented by someone else, and found out that that was not actually something that we were able to do. And so they worked to change the society legally, culturally, etc., to reflect exactly what we needed to do. I would say, and this is my point, is A, we're having the wrong conversation because what we continue to have a conversation is why it sucks that the world has changed. Face it, the world has changed. And yeah, maybe it sucks and maybe it doesn't, but let's not have that conversation.
Ryan,
conversation should
pause for
be,
breath.
what does the future look like? Open up your imagination and say, what would be possible? Not good and bad, but what would be possible if 1 million new people came into wherever? Because that's the conversation that Germany and other places are supposed to be having.
I think that the future of Europe's cities and of most European states will be quite similar to the past. And for most of human history, we've lived in multi-ethnic environments. And in most of human history, different communities have established influence in order to run a lot of parallel institutions. What's developing in Britain, I find very interesting, is how, because of decisions that have already been made, different religions are increasingly operating their own school systems, and there's a dramatic growth in Muslim, Hindu, Sikh, and Jewish schooling. I'm Jewish, and in my community, the percentage of children that go to Jewish schools has increased in my lifetime from 30% to 70%.
The last pope
is that
thought one thing.
I think we just have to accept that down the line, our societies will just be, they will not be classical nation states.
Right.
And in
that's
being
my point.
so,
I'm
they
saying,
will be much
but how
less
to get there?
I'm saying
cohesive.
don't accept anything.
Without violence.
What do we want the future
people-
of society to be? Go change it. You wanted a society in which stigma around HIV or stigma around drinking was not what it was and had been, and so you changed it. So I don't want to live in a society in which we think that other people are bad and that the migrant refugee issue is a humanitarian crisis. I think it's a massive business opportunity for the globe that we have an educated, trained population that unfortunately has been forced to flee for a variety of reasons, and not just from Syria, but Latin America and Africa and Asia as well. And like, great, I have millions of new people to learn from and have work and do all sorts of things. So how am I going to build a system
A lot
to
of
support
states
Sven
like
needs
the
to
one
cut
that
in
we're
right
in
now.
are not so comfortable with this. It's like sort of,
I'm
well, hold
afraid
on,
that
I'd just like to answer that, is that, right, it's
30 seconds.
It's in Estonia and in the Baltic states. These are sort of former Russian imperial territories that underwent Russian demographic colonization. And having struggled very hard to establish nation states, and with these appalling demographics that these countries have, sharp population decline and very high emigration rates to Britain and to Germany, the population and the political atmosphere is very apprehensive about how rapid demographic change of the demography would look like. What might look like small populations of 100,000 people coming with very high fertility rates to states that number, sort of small populations could dramatically alter their makeup in the future.
Sven.
Well, it's, for a non-native speaker of English, it's difficult to jump in quickly enough. But I would like to say that I'm afraid that it actually goes much deeper than that. Just the sort of issue of nation state versus a multi-ethnic state or mono-ethnic state or multi-ethnic. I think that basically the whole concept of progress is usually defined as the improvement or the constant improvement of the human condition. And what we are not seeing is the sort of simultaneous improvement of the human capacity of perception, but also human nature. And I think that this crisis or crises like this one, they are bringing out the best in some people, but also the worst in others. And I'm afraid that when we see this, the concepts like say political correctness being ridiculed in American presidential debates, and then basically we are sort of taking off the veneer of culture and exposing the sort of unchanged human nature, which is not really that nice. I mean, and that's really the scary bit of it. And in a situation where basically no one has the authority or the legitimacy to actually tell masses what's right and what's wrong. I mean, the moral authority is sort of eroding, I think. Some 30 years ago, when someone said something on television, I mean, it was supposed to be, if not true, then at least it was supposed to be coming from someone with some knowledge on the issue. That's not the case any longer. So this proliferation of information actually has made it very, 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 very easy for people to play with the worst instincts of people and create sort of mass dissatisfaction with the existing status quo, even though no one has offered any workable alternative.
Exactly, it's my question. I mean, especially if we look against Central and Eastern Europe, and for example, the different waves of world value surveys that have been done over the course of the last 20 years, we see that, like, typically there's already almost next to no trust in the legitimacy of institutions in this part of the world anyway. So nobody's even. I'm even wondering if people, you know, even if the government would be coming up and rolling out these excellent and brilliant ideas, how to overcome the anxieties and fears that people have about immigration and refugees, that would they be legitimate in the first place? And
but isn't that, I mean, didn't you just articulate the solution? Like, if the government did something that actually was beneficial and constructive, then the trend of lack of trust in an institution would reverse. So instead of lamenting,
the first obstacle is just very high.
Fine. The first obstacle to anything is very high. Like, I am reasonably confident that everybody you talk to, the first 100 people you talk to when you launched any of your very successful campaigns, basically said some variation of, you must be crazy, right? No way. People won't do it. People won't listen. People won't change, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, I'm not going to believe that. And you went out and you did it, correct?
Absolutely, and that's why I'm such a believer in, call it self-organizing, in the sense that you have to, I mean, picking apart your point here, but I think that most adult people, do respond to the signals they pick up from their environment, and then they try to make decisions that are okay or best for them in these circumstances. So you have to treat people as that with respect. You have to listen to legitimate fears. And so I think this is coming back to my point of sort of believing in decentralized solutions. I didn't mean exactly that, like, you know, let's do away with the government and let's just exactly, like what I said is that I believe that these solutions and ideas and innovations will need to emerge from actual, you know, living people engaging with problems that they see in their environment, figure out solutions that might work, and then the government can have a huge role in scaling them up and supporting things that seem like they can, you know, grow some roots. But I think that since, you know, we're in a complex place right now, bring back to Estonia, I've tried to change discourse here a couple of times. It literally starts from just talking to people. Like, you go out and start talking to people, and I think I've had to grow emotional capacity to tolerate the huge amount of conflict, to take that fear and actually kind of respect the idea that, you know, people make valid points from, you know, their current background. And as you keep speaking to people, as you keep collecting the ideas that they're articulating, you know, a picture emerges, a worldview emerges, and then you can kind of start hacking it from there. And it's very, I think it's easy to, not easy, but it's a lot of work still, but it's relatively straightforward to communicate for change once we know what the change needs to be. And it's easier to solve sort of, you know, reasonably narrow problems one at a time. So like smaller solutions, or sort of like cut specific feedback loops, not to try to solve absolutely everything at the same time. But I think that's when the technology comes in, really. Like, we have all these ways of reaching out, but once we really need to imagine, you know, where it is, where we want to go, and we also need to really respect where people are now.
But I think we still haven't talked really about the elephant in the room, at least one of the elephants. We probably have several, and it's definitely the media. I mean, a lot of the public opinion setting on these issues is set by the mass media, and that runs like on the fuel of emotions. And I just want you, Ben, to maybe start out on the role. How do you see if it's working or helping or working against it? Is it counterproductive? Or?
Just back to what this conversation is about is statehood, and it's about seeing how that's functioning now, what's it like in the future, and what's it like in the past. And when I look at the nature of statehood in Europe or the Western states over the last 30 years, I see a declining capacity of government to access capital and to access wealth. And right now, globally, we have in tax havens money that is not part of the financial system accessible to the state, more money than it is the equivalent annual GDP of China. And I don't believe that the pressures that Europe is under right now can be resolved without accessing more of that money and without giant multinational corporations paying tax. The giant technological companies, as they are not paying tax.
If I waved a magic wand, if I called Mark Zuckerberg and I got him to pay tax in the UK, and you had all the money that you wanted, I would still argue that nobody knows what to spend the money on. That's ultimately going to result in a constructive change. And that is the problem right there.
No.
Money is
right
not...
now we are
money's
practicing
not,
austerity in the United Kingdom.
Money is not...
We have a the government in
So-
the United
so wait,
Kingdom
so
and
wait,
the Baltic
wait, wait,
states is
if-
dramatically reducing
Okay, if
state
everybody was flush,
expenditure.
if everybody was flush, if everybody felt great about their economic status, we would be much more welcoming to people on the outside? No.
I don't think
the
there's
problems will continue to stack up and change. We need to address the problems that we have. Right now, one of the big problems that we have is that people are terrified of other people. That has been historically true. We have also shown that we can change that through the methods that you were just talking about, through conversation. That has been obscured in the technological era because it is so much easier to spread bullshit than it is to have a thoughtful conversation and listen to another person. But fine, you want to talk about how do we communicate for change? Everybody blames the media for fomenting this anger.
I do.
Yeah,
All the time.
well, I am a media company. In my pocket, I have just as much capacity to reach and influence the way that people think. Maybe I need some help on what to say, and there are probably some people who can help that, but there is nothing preventing us as a society from taking responsibility for changing the conversation, changing the ideas, changing the
Brian,
policies,
but you're
and
preaching the
changing
choir
behavior.
here. I think everyone here is doing that.
I think that
but it's not enough.
No.
The
First of all, I
proliferation
do
of-
not agree that we are doing it
It's-
because
it's-
I
it's
know
so
that I do
easy
not
today.
spend enough time doing
It's
it.
so easy to publish. I mean, but basically, we have like 5,000 Facebook friends. So, I mean, 10 years ago, were those mailing lists. And today, I mean, all of those 5,000 people are perfectly capable of producing, say, half a page worth of content every day. No one's capable of able to actually go through 2,500
And the
pages
stuff
of
that
content.
bubbles up is
So
not the good
basically,
stuff.
the capacity to actually process and analyze and synthesize and do something with that content and critically actually assess the quality of the information, it's not there. So I'm afraid that we are seeing sort of very negative side effects of the information age. We are used to sort of taking the availability of information technology as entirely positive, and I think that it's predominantly positive, but there are side effects which we will have to learn to manage, and we haven't so far, I'm afraid. That takes perhaps another generation or so, but that's the big problem. I think the superficiality of the audience is actually dramatically increasing. And just in the other auditorium a couple of hours ago, I heard the argument that we do not want to turn by education. Today we do not want to turn people into computers. We just want to the pupils to know that there are computers and you can turn to when you want to access information. I think the capacity of people to actually critically first process and then critically assess the information and the attention span that's decreasing, and that's a big problem, and that actually makes it so much easier for those people who want to capitalize, benefit from actually spreading the fear and confusion. That it makes it so much easier for those people to like we know our big neighbor in the propaganda wars. They basically want us to believe that there is no such thing as objective information. Well, there's a multitude of different versions of truth, and each of them is equally valid or invalid. So I think it's a big problem in today's information society.
Before I give the mic to Riina, just everybody be ready to ask any questions if you should have any, so prepare them.
I'm wearing my systems thinking hat today, so I'm begging to disagree here, because I agree with you that the information is proliferating and there's, all kinds of quality of that, and this is a really recent phenomenon, but we gotta have more faith in self-organization of, people's ability to, cut through that. Like, even if we look back in our own experience living under the Soviet Union and under the Soviet propaganda machine, there was, we adapted to knowing that there's a reality beneath this. Or even, I'm currently inspired by Bernie Sanders' campaign in the States, so it's very interesting to also watch that dynamic between sort of, how he's using technology to mobilize, bring people together, but how the corporate media isn't really covering it as extensively as it is covering some other candidates. And while the corporate media has covered Trump quite extensively, and a lot of people are, going with it, there's also a self-organizing skepticism as a result of that. So I think that, all this proliferation will sort itself out, and that, there are reasons to believe in the sort of collective wisdom that will hopefully, come closer to solutions. But I come back to the point that I think we're in a moment of chaos right now.
Basically, I very much hope you're right, but I think it's too soon to tell, because this information age is with us for such a short time, and I think that there are certain aspects that we have not quite become aware of, and we have not quite learned how to manage.
But every generation has faced some version of this, right? So every generation has had a panel just like this, and some people said, no, we can't have industrial machines, right? We need people to make our clothes and build our cars and whatever. And they were like, damn them robots. We're still having that conversation. But some people, said it isn't about the vessel of the communication, but what in fact we put through it, right? So we have an opportunity right now as human beings, whether we are American or Estonian or whatever, to say, actually, I don't think that people who are forced to flee because of terror and persecution are bad people. I do think that there are, and I can prove quantitatively, either based on history or project going forward, cultural and economic benefits for it. I can create or align the opportunities that I know we have as a society. There are jobs that need to be done, and there are people who are being forced to flee who are showing up who need jobs because they're no longer able to live in the place where they had a job. We can match those things up. Like, solve for the problems that exist in front of us instead of talking about the problems as immovable. That's what I'm saying. That's where you start. I would argue that the answer to communicating for change is not one specific answer. It is simply to be communicating for change. We are in chaos, so which avenue do we want to come out of it? Let's go fight for what we want. Now, if we want to disagree about whether or not we think that human beings are deserving of certain rights and protections, I am happy to have that debate, and I am pretty confident we will not agree if you are on the side that says that people who are forced to flee because of terror and persecution do not deserve basic rights and protections. I'm also backed up at present by the UN compact that was agreed to by every law in the land. So if we want to have a discussion about whether or not we want to change the rules of society,
but nobody's saying that. What we're trying to do is
in the United States, there are people.
Well, we're not in the United States.
Everywhere in the world, people are saying the Hungarian border is closed because they are saying that people who've been forced to flee because of terror and persecution, who are legally protected by the compact protecting refugees, are not to be given asylum in their country. That is a violation of existing law. If we want to have a conversation about whether or not to change the laws, that is a problem in front of us that we can absolutely have a conversation about. But we either have a system and we use it, or we decide that the system sucks and we change it. But if we want to change it because it is not working, which I don't think anyone disagrees that at present the systems that run our society are high functioning in any capacity, then we should be having the conversation about what kind of change we want. That is what is going on in the United States and is so fascinating. Bernie thinks the system sucks and he's railing against that change. Trump thinks the system sucks and he wants change. They just have very different avenues as to what we should come out the other side of a crappy system should be. I am much more on one side than the other. Either way, I'm not in disagreement with either of them. The way that we currently run the country needs to change. So let's have the spirited debate about what way we want it to change, not whether or not we want it to change. And on that, we will get somewhere. I don't know where, but she has an opinion, you have an opinion.
Are you an open borders activist?
Am I a what?
I'm trying to understand your position because I don't fully understand it. Is that when dealing with the refugee crisis, the number one priority has to be to solve the war in Syria. But I think it's very rhetorically...
The humanitarian community would disagree with you. They would say the number one priority is to take care of the people who are flooding out of boats and onto the shore.
I'm not a politician. I don't...
That's exactly the issue.
I'm not a politician, but something I do see is that right now, I do understand and sympathize with the German government and the French government in taking a lot of the decisions they've made, because currently in France, the National Front, which advocates withdrawal from the EU, the Euro, NATO, and the complete rejection of asylum as a principle, is polling around 40% for the next presidential election. And it might be very rhetorically pleasing for the French government to advocate for sort of an unlimited flow of people coming into France, but that will result in the far right coming to power, which will result in no asylum. So I think I understand.
Three times today somebody has said, quoted, which is not an actual accurate quote, but I'll say it just again because everybody knows it, that if Henry Ford had asked his customers what they wanted, they would have wanted a faster horse. And instead, he said, maybe the people don't necessarily know what they want. I'm going to lead and create a car, and our whole society was transformed. Okay, so right now, if you ask the vast majority of the global public, they're pretty comfortable with where they are, and change freaks them out. Okay, so we can say, you know what? That's cool. Stay the way that you're going to be. Or we can go and say, let's change stuff. And I'll give you a perfect example in the refugee crisis. The political solution to what's happening in Syria is not going to help the millions of innocent women and children who are fleeing gang violence in the northern triangle of Latin America. The refugee crisis is a crisis of forced migration because people are being subjected to terror and persecution around the world. Let's solve for the problems that we need to solve for. Communicating for change, right now we are not solving for the right problems. We're not even discussing the right problems. We're discussing the fact that we have problems and having a spirited disagreement about whether or not the problems are worthy of conversation or not, while millions of people are, I'm not talking about us, I'm saying like the world is like wringing its hands about the idea of should we have a debate or shouldn't we have a debate. Debate the goddamn legislation. In the United States, we have an empty Supreme Court seat because one of our justices died. We have spent so many column inches and cable news hours talking about whether or not the Senate should or shouldn't do its job. It's on paper in the Constitution, the founding document of our country, that says the Senate is supposed to have a hearing and vote on the guy. You want to vote the guy down? Vote the guy down. That's your job. But vote. Just play by the system or change the system. Let's not have a conversation about whether or not we should or shouldn't have a system. So I'm saying communicating for change is about actually communicating and acknowledging the fact that we need to change. We are, as a social good, humanitarian crowd, as government, as media, we are talking about whether or not we should change. We don't get to decide whether or not we're going to change. We only get to decide how. So let's talk about how we want to change. She wants to change society so that stigma around things that should not have stigma attached to them are no longer stigmas. That is a great thing. I happen to agree. Probably some people disagree. But she's saying this is the path towards change that we need to take. Not, should we have a discussion about stigma around HIV? Is that a worthy use of our time in society? It doesn't matter. It's happening. People are being persecuted against. We should have a conversation about how not to have that. So communicating for change is not communicating whether there should be change. It's how do we do it? And what I'm saying is, do it.
But again, to look at this from the historical perspective, I thought there was an excellent point made by the president of this country earlier today, which is that after World War II, when you have the greatest power of government over the forces of capital in the United States and in the United Kingdom, you have the equivalent in real dollar terms of 50 billion spent on dealing with displaced people and refugee flows at the time. But that today, the European Union can only access 3 billion in order to
Again,
push.
if I found you
But-
a bag
and
of money, would
so-
you know where you want to spend it?
Well, I don't think it's very mysterious where to put the money. I don't think it's very mysterious where to put the money. Like on the tubes in London, charities are begging for with advertising for
but
blankets.
the Gates Foundation decided that the system of change in the United States was not going to was not going to effectively address something like the malaria crisis. Bill Gates, for a variety of reasons, has a very large amount of money, and he said, you know what? I'm not going to play by that set of rules. I'm going to change the rules.
The
Mark
organizer now
Zuckerberg
is going to use
changing
her
the
right
rules.
to intervene.
Lovely duo act that you guys are having. But I just want to, hello, I'm Helen, nice to meet you all. Can I drop in to actually bring another element to this discussion? What I'm really interested to discuss about are what are the tools for communicating for change? And this is something which I've been finding super fascinating about having a festival in my hand, which has a followership, which has spokespersons as artists, which has these communication channels. If, let's say, we've defined a problem and we need to communicate this, I would say that we have pretty powerful tools in our hands to actually do so. So what I'm fascinated about these days is that the toolkit is much more wider, and the spokespersons that we can use, if we've defined the matter, can be actually integrated into this process if we want to do it. I mean, having a festival, having pop culture, working with pop culture can be such a powerful tool to communicate change, basically. So I mean, I can call my festival a media channel if I want to, I think. I mean, having a conversation about media has to be broader in that matter. So whoever has followership, listenerships, or whatever can very efficiently and effectively these days communicate for change. So I'm just curious about why not very many of us are deciding to do so, because don't we think that it's our part in our society? Do we think somebody else should be doing it? Do we feel like the government should be doing it? I'm just really loving this vibe around this event that we're discussing now more and more, that, okay, governments, perhaps they're not even supposed to have that knowledge and tools. I mean, why would we even expect that the government should have the best tools for communication?
We had a big debate about this.
I'm actually a big believer in public broadcasting. And like currently in the United Kingdom and in the United States, media that is driven by a profit margin, it is covering sort of events like the sort of EU referendum that we're having, or the refugee crisis, based on how can they sell the most copies by whipping up the most hysteria. And they're not doing that because they've got any cultural values attached to it. They're doing that because the purpose of this publication is profit. And I'm a big believer in public broadcasting and I think that it comes back to the points I've been making about tax, is that we need, European countries and the United States need strong, well-funded public broadcasters. In the United Kingdom, PR agents outnumber journalists 6 to 1. I don't think that's a very healthy ratio. And I think that it's very important in the 21st century to learn media literacy. And one of the key points is that unless the information that you're reading online is from a public broadcaster and you're reading it for free, you're the product. And I'm very concerned about that. And I view in Europe and the United States, we've had a decline in the economics and the financing of journalism, and the rise in clickbait and click-through stories, which is it contributing to hysteria?
Well, I believe that I also believe in public broadcasting, but again, I don't want to come across as a pessimist here, but I'm afraid that we, virtually everyone here in this room and probably on the other side of the screen, agrees on the basic issues we are talking about. But I do not think that many people who actually should be, whose fears we should be addressing are actually following what we are talking here. And with the media, the problem is that increasingly people are not coming to the media outlets in order to actually as the blank sheets in order to make up their minds. They come with a sort of pre-existing ideological predisposition, and they basically want to hear what they like rather than get objective information in order to make up their minds. I think when you look at the sort of proportion of the U.S. Republican voters who believe that Obama is a secret Muslim. I mean, it's not for the lack of objective information that is out there. It's basically they believe what they want to believe. And here in Estonia, I mean, according to the most recent census, we had like 200 villages with less than 3 people living in them. And typically, the sort of demographic portrait of such villages, and say 80-year-old mother with his middle-aged, often drinking son who's out of work for some time, and when they basically say that, well, the problem is that we don't have any people left in this village, we don't have any children, we don't have work, and we don't have children because of the gay people, and we don't have work because of the immigrants. I mean, it's so utterly absurd.
Right.
It's, but that's what they want to believe, and they unfortunately there are media channels available that would basically support that.
But their media
conviction.
channel, I mean, we can all access Sesame Street too. The problem is not the media, the problem is not the United Nations, the problem is not the White House or the Kremlin or anyone. The problem is that we as citizens have abdicated our responsibility to shape the society in the way that we believe is right, and are giving that responsibility to anyone who will take it and profit from it or whatever. The work that you do is so much more directly relevant to the idea of change because it is at an individual human level behavioral change. You do or do not say things about someone. You do or do not take actions that are, in the mind of at least someone constructive. Voting is another one. Now, I recognize that in the Baltics and in other parts of the world, the capacity of individuals to exercise their individual rights to become more knowledgeable and to become, agents of change are much more limited. So yeah, maybe those of us in the United States who have presumably, large amounts of freedom to do these things should take on a greater responsibility. That's why I'm leading this project, to try and get more Americans engaged in efforts to help the refugee crisis. Because if we do more as the United States, and we are woefully underperforming as a country, as a market with respect to most global humanitarian issues, if we do more, not only will we have greater power than most other places by sheer size of population, but we will also show leadership and others will be able to follow it. What that requires, though, is Americans, not American media, not American government, not American corporations, Americans, individual Americans, and there are 320 million of us to choose from, getting off their couch and doing something. And we have become lazy and narcissistic as Americans and human beings kind of in general. We like the idea that someone will just package up our media and give it to us and we don't have to work to find altering views. We like the idea that if we open up Twitter, we'll see a stream of stuff, and not make the effort to go follow people that we find abhorrent. What you said is so important, right? You had to get a little bit of a tougher skin because people would say nasty things to you when you tried to understand their position and convince them. Yeah, well, suck it up, people. If we want society to be shaped in a certain way, we have to do it. You're a politician. I can only imagine, right? And I work in politics. Like, the things that you must hear and have to put up with, that doesn't mean that you're like, fuck it, I'm not going to go be a part of politics anymore or try to do better for the world. You actually are representative of someone who is an advocate for change and communicating for change. That's the model. It's not a phone, it's not a website, it's not a newspaper, it is a human being. And the more of us who are involved in civic life, who are involved in whatever form of civic life, government, social activism, media, right? That's what we'll do. The only difference, I am similar without all the talents of these people, but what I try to do is change the tool set and the mechanism so that all 3 of these have greater capacity to influence instead of abdicating our responsibility.
Brian, I want to come here with a question. Let's suppose that there's something to your sort of self-flagellation or whipping that we are at fault because we're not acting and we've abdicated our rights to do so and our obligations to do so. And it's something we discussed about. It was very interesting yesterday evening. And we were talking about the US system and the electoral politics there right now with Trump and Sanders on the fringes, whipping up anger. But the question is that what do you do with that anger? Is there a way to use that as a constructive force? Now in Estonia we have the similar situation. We have the far right rising in polls by a percentage point per month since the election day. Now let's try to put this question or situation upside down and ask ourselves, is there something constructive that we can do with this anger that is obviously there? Is there some way through communication to help vent that or turn that into a more constructive force and thus take it away from the guys who would just surf the anger?
Listen. I think we just...
It's very beautiful, but...
No, like literally, I think we need, especially those of us who aren't leading the that rise in the far right, people who are on the other side need to do a better job of actually just listen to the legitimate, potentially legitimate parts of whatever unvented fears there are. And in my work, I'm becoming a bigger and bigger believer in getting together in small groups, and this is why I love the festival as well. I feel like, as a medium, I feel like there's so much to be said about the media and commenting and being online and sort of participating in this reality, but there's also a lot to be said about just getting together and learning together and kind of having your views challenged in groups, kind of giving voice to that collective mind, like developing new tools about, what are all the elephants in the room that have not been spoken about yet. And I don't think here in Estonia we're doing it enough. I think that even the conversation about tolerance even is very polarized. It's polarized from both sides, and so it's the people who are very enlightened and have the sort of global elite mentality aren't always very elegant in kind of not blaming the other side and being just sort of ignorant people living in the countryside, and I think it's that kind of dialogue. Like we can't have a real dialogue if we don't have the basic recognition that there are legitimate fears.
But not all fears are legitimate. Definitely.
I agree.
When you have an argument, basically from one of the leaders of this far-right party, that well, gay people should vote for us because we do not want to give them equal rights, but at least we do not stone them to death like the Muslim immigrants would do. I mean, you can't compromise with this.
But
this
he's not the
position.
person you should have a discussion with. But I think you should have discussion with the voters for that person. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I comment? We organized in September a concert, when was that, half a year ago, in support of Open Society. And while doing this, basically the idea was to throw a concert and do a communication campaign to support tolerance. And while doing this, the whole team of us in a way realized that we can only do it if we're really prepared to enter a two-way conversation, that you can't go preaching to people that, oh my God, these are the values that you have to support and this is the right way. But now thinking back to all these conversations that I had on Facebook, on private messaging on Facebook with people who sent me hate mail, and I just entered into a conversation with them. It was highly interesting psychological effect is that first you get hardcore attack on you, and then you enter into a conversation, and the third sentence you discuss with them, you're already in a conversation, and in the end they thank you for, oh my God, I never would have even expected a reply. And there's so much of this communication that it's a preach type of a communication, that we think that I'm going to write an article and I'm going to tell you how I think this should be done. and you're actually not, even those of us who write these articles, we're not interested in what people think about it. We're so convinced that we're right. But if we don't have this conversation mentality in the whole communication, then it's just like loses the point.
I quite agree. I mean, this sort of people-to-people conversation actually helps quite a bit. And probably the politicians are too lazy. Through media, it doesn't quite work like this. And I think that this pro-open society, tolerance community should mobilize. I mean, and it's not pleasant a pleasant thing to do. I mean, when you start receiving hate mail, for example. I mean, it's not everyone is comfortable with that. But actually, if this community, and there's quite a sizable chunk of the whole society who actually would like to see an open society and tolerance towards, different
I would even lower the barrier to entry even further, right? The idea that you have to mobilize, that you have to be a big group, et cetera. One of the really shocking things with what's going on politically in the United States right now is how many people in your very close network of friends who you just assumed because, you all live in a certain place, or your kids all go to the same school, or, you're all Jewish and that they all, are in agreement with you. And the number of people who, when presented with, a hard choice that they have to make, go a different direction, and you never talk to them, is quite surprising, right? So I don't think the idea of, preaching tolerance is something that has to be part of a movement or a campaign. I literally think every day, if you're making sure that if you are in fact comfortable talking about that, and you don't have to be, right? But if you believe that refugees deserve rights and protections or whatever, then every day in every conversation you should find some way to do it. And if you're not comfortable, that's where we as organizers should help. So like we're organizing a book club in the United States. I mean, it is the lowest form of, engagement. People we know will get together and talk. They're already doing it. The only reason we're organizing it as a book club is because we don't think that they have the capacity to talk about this issue in the way that we think will be constructive. So we're giving them the tool. They'll read it, so it's not, don't take my word for it, right? Here are 5 published works from differing views, and they all happen to kind of reinforce support. Here are 5 questions to ask. I'm not even telling you what to think. I'm saying ask the question and have the conversation. Will 100% of the people who participate in that come, to agree with what we want them to? Of course not. But will 100% of them never engage in the conversation if we don't make it so painfully easy for them to do so on their terms? Unequivocally. So the idea of communicating for change is communicating. And we are, and you are 100% right, in the digital age with all of these, platforms and social networks and stuff like that. We have actually reduced the amount of human-to-human conversation, constructive dialogue, gathering together, number of friends. We have all of those things are on the decline, and it correlates very well with the rise of the limited number of voices with more strident views, not extremist views, just strident views. There are very loud people who I agree with who get way more airtime, and I'm sure are offensive to the other side. But when I look at my network of friends, it has nothing to do with political ideology. It has nothing to do with whatever. It has everything to do with the fact that at some point I formed a relationship with them. And that relationship came from time being spent together and conversation being had. And I assure you that though we may not agree on everything, I have the potential to influence that person when it really matters because I have that relationship. That is the vehicle for change, is the relationships and the conversations. We are trying to let somebody else take responsibility for that, when at the end of the day, yeah, we can use those channels and tools. We can all use the media. Somebody has to say something. So if you don't like what's being said in the media, start your own media company. Start your own festival.
But I think with the refugee crisis, something I've kind of noticed in this conversation is that because the United States participation in the refugee crisis is optional, and because of the different demographic weight, the different position of the United States, it's inherently different demography. That means that even taking in similar numbers or larger numbers of refugees from the Muslim world, it wouldn't change the demographic balance of the United States. But whereas in Europe, there is they do affect the demographic balance
I
in a
agree with
different
you.
way.
What I'm saying is
And I think
it's
they-
not optional for us, because not on demographic grounds, but the security of the globe is of great interest to us. The
Sure,
economic
sure.
prosperity. No.
Yeah,
So
but
so
let-
it
let
is
Ben
in our
finish
interest.
first.
Practically,
No,
you're over the Atlantic.
Practically,
And-
the argument that people are using
But
in the
what the
United States to prevent
situation
refugees
is
is
far.
the security
What's
and
quite
terrorism one.
interesting to me is that the debate about refugees from the kind of Arab Muslim world in Europe is very similar to the debate about kind of Hispanic Mexican migrants to the United States.
Yeah.
If you just kind of zoom out, we try and look at the historical patterns, we see a demographic blurring occurring along this sort of bend of the world. And we see China blurring with Southeast Asia, we see sort of Africa and the Middle East blurring with Europe, and we see South and Central America blurring with the United States. So I find that very interesting, the kind of similarities.
Right.
And one of these issues to me is, if we look back in history, why are Americans so talking about the wall, talking about Mexico? Well, because there's been a giant increase in the Hispanic population of the United States. The white Americans are going to be a minority in a sort of plurality setting by 2050.
Right.
And this is happening in a society that's still, in a lot of ways, a colonial society.
No, but take
It's
the
a society
example.
founded on white supremacism.
I'm not
It's a
disagreeing with your
society-
politics, but wait a second. The context of the conversation about communicating for change is there are people in the United States who believe that the best way to move towards the future as America is to build a wall and keep other people out. I do not agree with that. So when anybody, no, this is very important. When anybody says that, and by the way, my 8-year-old came home, 3rd grader, came home, and some kid in their class said, Donald Trump said, we're going to build a wall, Mexico's going to pay for it. I sat my 8-year-old down, and I spent 20 minutes, and I said, let me explain to you why we don't agree with that, and you're 8, so I get to tell you that we don't agree with that. And more importantly, let me tell you what to say to that ignorant little 3rd grader when you go back to school tomorrow. I communicated a difference of opinion as to how it is that we should move forward in the United States. If I left it to the media, my son is never going to watch Fox News or MSNBC or read the New York Times, as much as I would love for him to read the New York Times. If anything, I get him to read the sports section. So it was my responsibility in interaction with another human being
Of course.
to communicate
Of
that.
course,
So it does
of
not
course,
matter
of course.
what the issue is: hunger, terrorism, illiteracy, whether you think the colors of the building should be blue or green. Like, have the conversation. Don't say, well, we're obviously moving towards green because the demographics of the world are changing and such, or technology, or because Facebook tracks our data. That is a piece of evidence in the conversation.
No,
it
I
is
don't
not the
disagree.
determinant of anything.
No, I don't disagree. It's just I'm trying to work out why we've got this.
I don't
Why
care
we've got
why.
this.
I care
Well,
about the fact that we are
do,
not
actually.
having,
I
as
do.
Americans, as the world, we are spending all of this time trying to wonder why the world has changed instead of trying to change it. To some extent, it matters why the world has changed, but that ship already sailed.
I think
now.
in order
Let's
to
go figure out what kind
have
of world we
change-
want.
Guys, we have like 2 minutes to wrap this up.
But in order to to have change in the United States and in Europe, you need to understand history, and you need to
If you
understand
assume-
that these two classical systems,
Sure, we have lots
which
of
is that
mechanisms.
the United States was historically based on white
Right,
supremacism.
but think about how elite
and
this
that
conversation
population
is.
minority in Europe was in the last 60 years has been based on a nation-state system.
We
which
can
is coming
have
to
a
an end.
spirited conversation about the historical, demographic, and political changes in the state of the nation state and this, that, and the other thing. The 30 of us and the thousands of people watching are the only people who have taken enough time and enough effort to go and do that. So if you want to drive change, walk around, knock on doors, and hand out history books, hand out newspapers, pay for reasonable, diverse media subscriptions to be accessible to people who are not in a position to pay for them themselves, because knowledge does, in fact, overcome fear and does allow for a path to constructive conversation. So don't talk about the fact that, Fox News or BBC or whoever does or doesn't report on certain things. Like, if you want more people to see it, go knock on the doors and do it. It's not about media literacy. It's about, participation in the conversation. So, yeah, I agree. understanding history is absolutely valuable, except that I don't know what the future is going to behold, and I don't want to have another conversation about history. I would like to have at least some conversation with the people who are in authority all over the world, the humanitarian community, the government, me, about where we're going next, not what happened yesterday.
I want
That's
to make
how
one
we
comment. One pressing thing that has been in my thoughts is like I wonder, and I do wonder, why the tools for communication for governments are still mainly press releases and press conferences. Would you, or am I wrong? Is it something else? Because I think the innovation in the communication tools, if things are important, is something that we have to talk about.
The White House had this problem. I wrote a paper on this a few years ago. I'm happy to send it around. It's not that good. But the old way of doing it is, and the press secretary still stands up every day and briefs the press because the press reaches a lot of people. So they get their version of the story out there every single day, constantly. The White House is not satisfied with that. The White House has its own media operation. So when they wanted to promote healthcare, they went on Between Two Ferns, Zach Galifianakis's, weird thing, and it reached all these other people. They invited bloggers and YouTube, and Instagram, authorities to the White House to talk to the president. That had never been done, and people are like, President of the United States is way too good to talk to some, YouTube celebrity. No, not if that YouTube celebrity has reach and credibility in reaching a certain audience, and the president wants to reach an audience that the rest of the media establishment wasn't allowing him to reach.
The young invincibles.
Yes, the president goes out and talks to actual human beings in the community because that's the way in which he can, or maybe she in the future, can inflict change. Like, we should not be, why is it still the way? It doesn't have to be
in Estonia, obviously, the president can go and reach to a larger percentage of his constituents than his American counterpart can. But still, I mean, it's like saying how you sort of fight against climate change. Basically, if they are cutting down rainforests, and you should go and plant your own tree. I mean, that's a good advice, and you should go and do that. But it doesn't quite solve the whole of the problem in its entirety, I'm afraid. So this is something that every one of us should be doing, and I think that politicians are doing that a lot. I mean, they try to go to as many constituents and shake hands and talk to them, and if they do not, constituents will come to them. But even though in today's world, many people take the information from a huge variety of sources, not all of them equally reliable. And there are, this proliferation, this multitude of different channels and proliferation of information is something that we should not take only as a positive thing. I mean, it is very positive in many aspects, but there are also things that we should try to look into more deeply and basically try to come up with solutions for actually if we want to communicate and actually be on the winning side in this battle for the hearts and minds.
In order not to belittle any of the contributions that you've made, I'm not going to sum them up in my own words. I think it's been very fascinating, and we'll be able to rewatch most of this because there's a lot to think about. Thanks again, everybody, and we're going to meet a very special DJ pretty soon, so let's go down.